Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week, after teasing it in several other videos, I decided it was finally time to talk about Violator vs. Badrock #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in May of 1995, we can see here on the cover, which was drawn by one Rob Liefeld, and, given that it was drawn by Rob, I gotta say, actually pretty darn good. This is not a bad cover at all. However, this is only half of the cover. This cover, to get the whole thing, you had to buy 2 issues. I currently only have this one that features the Violator. There's another one that features Badrock. We can see Badrock's fist and thigh right here, and there's a whole other left side to this cover that I don't currently own. Now, I plan on trying to find this at some point or another, and once I do and get both of them, I will make a short about it to show everyone what that cover looks like completed. But in the meantime, we're kind of stuck with, just the right side of the picture. Writer, Alan Moore. Penciler, Brian Denham. Inker, Jonathan Sabal. Colorist, Eau Claire. Color separations, Extreme Colors. Letterer, Bill Oakley. Associate Editor, Kurt Hathaway. Editor, Eric Stevenson. The story starts out in Washington, D.C. as we see a couple of men driving a military transport. They are actually in the process of transporting convicted mafia don Vito Fanatucci, I think is how you're supposed to say that, to Rikers Island for his prison sentence. However, as the two drivers, the driver and the passenger, attempt to make idle conversation with each other, talking about, the weather is really something, isn't it? And man, I can't believe they just broadcasted the fact that we're transporting this mafia guy when there's been that, serial killer out wasting all these dudes. It seems dangerous. But we keep seeing the image zoom out further and further until we see the familiar shape of an eyeball that we've seen many times. And that, of course, is the eyeball of the Violator. And I want to say, I really like the way this is done because you can even see they paid attention and drew the image in reverse with the steering wheel being on the right-hand side. And we see it just zoom out a little bit at a time just until we get enough of each little segment of the Violator's eyes. The Violator, of course, having eyes similar to that of an insect. This is a really well done set of panels that I feel like you kind of overlook it if you're not paying attention to what it really is. But this is just, I really appreciate the way that they did this. And I wanted to really take a moment to kind of point it out and be like, this is super cool right here. At this point, the Violator springs his trap and jumps in front of the transport, smashing it. The 2 men inside immediately radio for help. However, we find out at this point that their code name and handle is Sitting Duck. Then they get an immediate response as a whole lot of other vehicles run in to basically trap the Violator where he's at. We see a bunch of different bulldozers just roll in from out of nowhere, closing in and creating like a perimeter. And, Violator doesn't understand what's going on at first, as he's like, man, the construction in this town is crazy. And then he states, hey, what's the problem? I like hearts. This is not a big deal. That's just what I eat. But then he realizes that this was all a trap set up to capture him. And before he gets too involved in trying to figure a way out of it, he notices that the transport truck is starting to rumble and make noises, and big giant dents are starting to protrude on the sides of the truck. And he realizes that something weird is going on here besides just being ambushed, and he might be in for a little bit more than he bargained for. And of course, it wouldn't be an Extreme Studios book if there weren't at least one 2-page vertical splash. Thanks a lot, guys. But in this splash, which does look pretty decent for, all intents and purposes, we see Badrock jump out of the back of the truck as the ambush is complete, now unveiling that they brought in some pretty heavy artillery to take on the Violator. And it seems odd at first that they would be so prepared for someone such as him. Even he's a little shocked and is like, oh, really? Another spandex creep? I thought I left that back in New York with Spawn. And, We see that Violator readies himself for a fight, but doesn't actually seem all that worried about what's going on right now. Badrock, however, is not taking his foe lightly whatsoever as he lunges forward and grabs the Violator, slamming him down into the pavement, and immediately starts punching him. However, at this point, we're introduced to one Dr. McAllister, who is in charge of this operation. She orders a nearby sergeant who is armed with a tranquilizer gun, as well as many of the other military personnel around, that she wants him to tranquilize the specimen as she's afraid that Badrock may be damaging it. And the guy's like, all right, sure, I guess. At this point, the battle continuing with Violator and Badrock. Violator actually showing some of his own strength as he immediately knocks the insanely large shoulder pads off of Badrock's costume with his own attacks, and is, trying to compromise with Badrock, stating like, hey man, why are we fighting? We're both gray. We should be on the same team. At this point, however, the rest of the military men are surrounding the two, open fire, as Badrock holds Violator up so that he can take the shots of all of the tranquilizer darts, which all thunk straight into the middle of his back. Violator then spins around and says, hey man, what gives? That's no fair. You guys are ganging up on me. You're supposed to fight me fair and square, mano a mano, so that I can treacherously stab you in the back. That's the way Spawn and I always do things. And Badrock very funnily responds, yeah, well, welcome to Washington, as he does a two-handed upward strike on the Violator and knocks him out cold. We also see that Badrock's costume has been heavily damaged during the fight, trying to give a little indication that, Violator is more than capable of handling himself in a physical brawl. However, at this point, with the strike by Badrock and all the tranquilizers in his system, the Violator is unconscious, and Badrock tells him, hey, we've got him, boys, load him up, let's get him back to the Institute. As we see him being carried by restraints that are attached to two helicopters in the most ridiculous way to transport something like this I can imagine. And they are taking him to the Whiteside Parsons Institute, which Dr. McAllister explains to Badrock is a institute that is designed to study the place where the paranormal and the scientific collide. And Badrock seems a little bit confused about all this, and she tells him, listen, it's not that big of a deal. You're just here to handle security. And he's like, okay, well, that's fine. We'll take care of that for you, Dr. McAllister, or can I call you Sally? And Dr. McAllister doesn't seem too enthusiastic about getting that chummy with Mr. Rock. Dr. McAllister immediately tells Badrock that she is not going to allow him to call her Sally, as she begins to explain why it is exactly they've gone to the trouble of capturing the Violator. She brings up the events of the Violator miniseries, which this story, by the way, is a somewhat direct continuation of. So if you haven't read or watched my videos on the Violator miniseries, I suggest you do so before watching all of this. You can find all 3 episodes of the Violator miniseries in my Spawn miniseries playlist. She talks to Badrock stating, you were at the mall when all that happened, right? And he's like, well, yeah, but I couldn't get in. There was like a force barrier preventing anyone from entering or exiting. She then, however, shows him some video security footage that they were able to recover from the mall that shows the Violator and an open hell gate. Badrock's like, wow, that's a gate to hell. However, Dr. McAllister states that she doesn't consider it to be hell. She considers it to just be a different dimension. And she also doesn't consider Violator to be a demon. She considers him to be an extraterrestrial. Kind of showing that because of her science background, she's rather skeptical of the whole heaven and hell narrative and the idea of paranormal or supernatural things being real. However, we know that in the context of this story, they are in fact real, and she's not necessarily, taking the right path and believing that they aren't. She then explains to Badrock that after discovering that this other dimension exists, the government decided to put a plan in motion to try and figure out how to get there because of the importance of whatever materials might be in this place. And Badrock's like, wait a minute, so you're saying you want the mineral rights? And she's like, well, among other things, there's also tons of other scientific study that can be done on this other dimension. And she then shows him that she has created a dimensional displacement unit, which is a way for them to open up a gate similar to the one that she saw the Violator do or open. However, Badrock's like, wow, this is cool. Does it work? And she's like, well, theoretically, but we don't have a way to power it. And that's the whole reason they kidnapped the Violator, or I should say captured him, is that they plan on using him to power their machine. And she also shows him that there's a homing sphere that has to go in with the, or I'm not sure if it has to go in. She doesn't get that deep into the weeds in explaining it. But this homing sphere is the way that they keep track of whoever they send to the other side so that they can then get back to where they started from here on Earth. And again, this is not necessarily anything they've actually tested, which to Badrock's credit, he brings up and is like, well, that's cool and all this looks super fancy, but if you haven't actually tested to see if any of it works, isn't everything just kind of like theoretical and academic at this point? We then see that Dr. McAllister actually gives a little bit of credit to Badrock and says that's a very astute observation, which was why it was so important for us to capture one of the creatures that we saw in the video footage so that we could power this unit. They then enter the area where they have the Violator chained up in some sort of plasma holding cell of some kind. She then states that this creature is imperatively important to this experiment and that they were very lucky that the only creature left on Earth that could open one of these dimensional gates was right here in Washington. However, Badrock is a little bit skeptical about this plan, and he's like, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This thing is a monster that eats human hearts, which is a fair observation and point to make on his part. However, Dr. McAllister, still being in her wholly scientific world, states, we can't judge an extraterrestrial based on their diet or where they live. And this creature, while coming from a different place, shouldn't be judged by our standards. At this point, Badrock just concedes the argument, is like, okay, sure, I'm going to call it a night. You want to join me for a nightcap? And the doctor says, no, I'm fine. I'm going to stay here and finish up some work, as she seems to be very in awe of the Violator and looks at him with an almost type of sensual gaze as she says, man, will you look at those beautiful mandibles. The next morning at the Institute, we see Badrock getting up and going to breakfast as two men bring in a giant box that was delivered for him and ask him where they want him to put it. He says, oh, that must be the new costume I ordered. Just go ahead and put it in my room. I'll open up that box later. We then see him walk past the hallway that leads to the Violator's chamber, and he decides to go down and take a look at the prisoner to make sure everything is still A-okay. As soon as Badrock opens the door, the Violator, who is now awake, immediately starts taunting him, saying, oh, wow, kinky situation, huh? I'm all in a cage, locked up in chains. I bet this is really turning you on. And then is like, don't worry, man, it's okay. It's the 90s. It's all right for two men to hug. I read a whole book about it. He then starts taunting Badrock, stating, I bet you would be more than happy to come in here and snuggle up to me if you had a SWAT team on your back to watch out for you. And, things might be a little different than they were last time. It's like, hey, I bet you got a lot of tension in those shoulders. Why don't I give them a rub for you? Just really kind of going full bore on being the Violator. At this point, however, Badrock swings around and says, listen, man, Sally might think that you're some kind of prize specimen, but I think you're from hell, and I can't wait to send you back there. At this point, after Badrock calls the doctor by her first name, Violator immediately recognizes that he's kind of got the hots for her and states, oh, well, I saw her first, and, I also saw you first, and, she's stolen your heart, but I kind of wanted that for myself, as Badrock finally just decides to leave well enough alone and walk back out to go get the breakfast that he intended to eat, leaving the Violator to his own devices in his plasma cell. However, before Badrock can make his way to the cafeteria, he is intercepted by none other than Dr. McAllister, who is seething about the fact that their entire operation has made front-page news. Badrock states that this is probably due to the PR team that works for Youngblood, and that, it's kind of cool that they made the front page. However, Dr. McAllister doesn't think it's cool at all, as she's worried that this kind of publicity will interfere with their work, as it may lead someone else to try and replicate their experiment, or get some sort of religious fanatics to come in and try and shut the whole thing down. But Badrock states, listen, I deal with this kind of stuff all the time. It'll blow over in a couple of days. It's not a big deal. Also, I'm kind of surprised that they went with calling this paper the Washington Post, as, obviously that's an actual news publication, and they may not have given, may not have. I guarantee they didn't give any permission for the name of their company to be used inside of this comic book. Badrock tries to calm the doctor down and state, look, everything's going to be fine. We're going to get through this and everything will continue just the way we're trying to get it done. However, we then see outside of the facility a woman in a very sultry suit slowly approaching the exterior, as the two guards on duty state, wow, would you look at that? And the one guy's like, hey, I can't afford to look at that, man, not on my salary. And the woman approaches the two men and states, I need to be let inside so that I can confront the hell creature. One of the guards is like, ma'am, I'm sorry. Like, you can't come in here. Like, I don't know what you're doing. And she's like, what I'm doing is showing up so that I can kill this creature. And I need to have access to the building immediately. Step aside. At this point, the guard puts a hand on his gun and states, ma'am, I'm sorry. We can't let you in. You're going to have to leave immediately. However, the woman that he's speaking to has no plans of following any of his orders. Without hesitation, the woman then states, may your God be with you then, as she unleashes an explosion, killing the guards, and then calmly walks through the rubble and fire into the facility. This, of course, immediately triggers an alarm, and the man inside of the control center tells Dr. McAllister that there's a terrorist who's entered the building and that there's already been an explosion in the lobby. However, Dr. McAllister is shocked to see the woman just walk through the explosion and says that shouldn't be possible for any normal human being. She then states that Badrock needs to get it in gear and protect the specimen. He states that something here is not right, as no one should have known where to go to find the specimen, and that it definitely shouldn't be this one woman who's capable of just waltzing in with all the security that they have. So he decides to run back to the Violator's holding cell and get some answers directly from the source. He then shows once again his immaturity, as he, instead of just opening the door to the room that the Violator is housed in, he punches his way through it despite having full access to this part of the facility. He immediately demands to know what's going on and tells the Violator that he wants answers ASAP so that he can figure out how to protect the facility and the doctor and even the Violator, who he really doesn't want to protect. At this point, Violator informs Badrock that he and his tootsie little doctor friend have found themselves in the middle of a war that's been going on since the dawn of time, and that the woman who has attacked the facility is in fact an angel. And Badrock naively says, well, aren't they the good guys? However, as we know in the mythos of Spawn, there's not really necessarily a benevolent good to heaven and the angels. They're more or less just an opposing faction to hell. And neither they nor the forces of hell really care about the world of the living or the earth as a whole in terms of protecting it. They just want to conquer it and conquer the opposite side. Violator quickly corrects him and says, yeah, in your dreams and on Christmas cards, this is a war that's been going on forever, and, they have no qualms about killing whoever gets in their way to win this war. He then notes to Badrock, like, there's only a few angels on Earth. I need to know which one we're dealing with. What color was her hair? Badrock responds white, and then Violator immediately realizes that he's dealing with the angel Celestine or Celestine. I'm not sure exactly how you're supposed to pronounce it. And then states that they're all in trouble now, as she's one of the most dangerous ones. Violator then goes on to explain to Badrock that the big difference between angels and demons is that demons are just regular guys, because killing mafia dons and eating their hearts is just regular guy activity. And that angels, however, have lost all of their imperfections in taking on the mantle. They lose their fear and their, inability, or their ability to have any kind of weakness or mistakes, and oftentimes end up losing their marbles as a result. He then states that Celestine is one of those angels, as, she's one of the worst ones, as we find out, at least through the Violator's recollection, that during the fall, she wore the teeth of rebel angels as a necklace around her neck as the war continued, and that she was also the one who was responsible for instituting the plagues against Egypt, and she was the one who called in the airstrike against Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was also her idea for the Great Flood. Basically, he's telling Badrock that she's one of the angels who really has no qualms about just inflicting the worst type of peril and destruction on the earth, and that she'll stop at nothing to complete her mission, no matter what it takes. We, of course, see her waltzing through all of the security measures, killing all of the guards one by one, making her way slowly towards the holding cell that the Violator is in. And the Violator states that, we've got a real problem on our hands here, because she's going to stop at nothing to kill me, and I don't know if I can take her on mano a mano, as we see her slowly unpacking her bag and getting her gear in order. We then see Celestine use her staff, which emits some sort of heavenly fire light energy, as she burns a hole through a wall trying to get to Violator. And Violator states there's one big difference between heaven and hell, and it's that heaven can't wait, which for those of you under the age of 30 is a movie reference. As we reach the end of the story in this issue, and we find out that the next issue will be called Where Angels Fear to Tread. On the next page, we get an advertisement for a bunch of places to buy comic books and conventions that are going to be happening where you can meet Evangeline. I would love it if anyone would ever comment on any of these videos who maybe was at one of these events and got to meet this random woman who was cosplaying as Evangeline back in the 90s. If you have any experience with this, please tell me about it in the comments, because I'd love to hear what this was all about. We then get a 2-page advertisement for the 4-issue miniseries Bloodpool. Not Deadpool, not Deadpool. Bloodpool. I gotta be honest, I don't know a whole lot about Bloodpool, and I think I maybe have like 1 or perhaps 2 of the issues of this miniseries. I'll have to dig through my collection and see. If I have all of it, I'll probably make some videos about it eventually, though it's not necessarily high on my list of priorities. We can see 2 of the characters featured here, Task and Soul, or I guess that's Soul spelled strangely, in a way that could, I guess, be like trademarked. I don't know what the capabilities of either one of these characters are or what powers they might have, but here they are, and apparently has something to do with some kind of school or training thing. Again, I don't know anything about Bloodpool, so if you do, feel free to talk about it. If not, it's cool. We're on the same page. We then get a 2-page advertisement for the Prophet ongoing series. Now, as of recording this video, I have not made any videos about the Prophet ongoing series because I haven't reached the point in the Youngblood ongoing series where Prophet breaks off into its own series yet. But when I reach that point, I will begin making videos about the Prophet ongoing series, because I don't think I have all of it, but I've got like a fair amount of it. Again, just stay tuned. It will be coming in the future, I promise. We then get an advertisement for Extreme Hits Absolute Zero, advertising such books as Glory, Nightmare, and Supreme. I have very little Glory, a decent little bit of Supreme, and unfortunately, I think I have all of the few issues of Nightmare that exist, though I don't believe I have the deluxe chromium cover. I'll have to keep an eye out for that. We then get an advertisement for the Berserkers, who we saw show up in the pages of Youngblood as well. I have no issues of the Berserkers miniseries, so I'm gonna have to keep an eye out for those and try and find them. I don't really know much about the Berserkers, but I do in fact hope that their love is like a truck. We then get an advertisement for Chapel number 1 of the ongoing series and Crypt number 1. These are also some series I don't have a ton of books of, and it's pretty like patchwork together what I do have. I'm working on trying to fill out more of my Extreme Studios collection, especially the stuff from like the early and mid 90s, because it does tie in with a lot of other books throughout the Image universe and within inside of the, Extreme Studios universe as well. So I'm trying to, flesh that out a little bit more. Thankfully, I can usually find these in like dollar boxes, and they're really inexpensive to get my hands on. We then, on the reverse inside cover, see again the advertisement for Wave 2 of Todd Toys, which unfortunately is kind of a little bit of a spoiler for something that we're going to be seeing later on in this miniseries with this Badrock figure. And that was Violator versus Badrock #1. Overall, I don't think it's a bad book, but it doesn't feel like it really hits the same way as issue #1 of the Violator miniseries did. Now, there's definitely narrative similarities to the way that the story's written, which of course there would be. They're both written by Alan Moore. But there was just something that hit a little bit differently with the dark humor that the Violator miniseries had that seems like it's kind of missing in this issue of Violator versus Badrock. I mean, you could tell where Alan is trying to capture some of that with the banter between Badrock and the Violator. And, the two of them kind of like trying to one-up each other and go back and forth with their wittiness and like little quips and stuff and, trying to get a one-up on each other. But it just doesn't feel like it's hitting on the same tone that we had in that first Violator miniseries. Now, then again, if you're not the kind of person who likes that, then you're probably super into the way that this one's been written. And who knows, there's 3 more issues to this series, so it could change. I honestly can't remember because it's been like close to 20 years since I've read it. So fingers crossed that things maybe change a little bit more and the story gets a little bit more fun. But then again, maybe that's not what you're looking for. Maybe you want more of a straightforward, action-oriented comic. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everybody's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.